Well, wonderful. It looks like we have the majority of our audience logged on here, so we can get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maya Swope, and I am the outreach coordinator here at Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness. Excited to have you all join for today's Lunch with the Friends presentation. Our communications director, Pete, will be talking about some of the myths that we hear a lot about sulfide mining and how that relates to building a green economy, and some of the science behind all of that. So I think it should be a really interesting presentation. Just wanted to get started with kind of a few Zoom things here. There is a chat at the bottom of your screen if you have any comments throughout the presentation, or if you have kind of technical questions, you can put those in the chat. If you have questions that are related more to the topics that you want Pete to address at the end, you can put that in the Q&A feature, also at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can at the bottom. Or towards the end of the presentation. And if anyone has issues connecting or hearing sound, you can shoot me a message in the chat and I can try to help you figure that out as well. A little bit about Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness. We are a nonprofit organization that's been around for more than 40 years, really committed to protecting the boundary waters and the communities that interact with the boundary waters. So we see this mission as having kind of three components: people, wilderness, and community. For people, we are really recognizing that all sorts of people benefit and enjoy the boundary waters, and our No Boundaries to the Boundary Waters program works to bring kids from Minneapolis and St. Paul and other communities up to experience the wilderness. For wilderness, we are really focused on protecting the boundary waters, protecting the clean water from mining. We are involved in lots of court cases, things like that, as well as some action in the legislature. And for community, we're kind of recognizing that the northern communities at the gateways to the boundary waters are really essential to having a healthy wilderness, having a functioning ecosystem in northern Minnesota. And so a lot of our work also is focused on keeping it all, working together on keeping northern communities healthy and keeping the ecosystem healthy as well. So I am going to turn it over in a second here to Pete. Pete is our communications director and has done a lot of research into some of these topics that we'll hear about today. So Pete, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Maya, for that introduction. And thank you everyone out there for joining us this afternoon. As Maya said, my name is Pete Marshall, and today, what I want to talk about are some of the big claims that are coming from the copper sulfide mining industry and their allies. And these are claims that have to do with, that basically say we need to open these highly dangerous, toxic, and controversial mines at the edge of the boundary waters, in particular, two mines, PolyMet and Twin Metals, in order to transition to a green economy. Basically, that if we're going to transition to the green economy, we need to start mining near the edge of the boundary waters wilderness. So right now, as I'm sure most of you know, we are at a turning point in our society, and it's a crucial turning point. Each year, the Earth is getting warmer, and right now, we look at the heat waves that have struck the Western United States, as well as the forest fires, the drought we're experiencing here in Minnesota, as well as fires, in the boundary waters. It's all too clear that global warming isn't some hypothetical event that may or may not happen in the future. It is something we are currently experiencing and living through. And it will only get worse. So the need to transition from an economy and a society that is based on fossil fuels and a carbon economy, in short, to a green economy where we derive our energy from the sun, from wind, from electricity, is more crucial than ever. Needless to say, there's huge political hurdles to get there. But we are fortunate enough to also have the technology to make this happen. That this clean energy in many cases is cheaper than carbon-based energy. So we are poised to make this transition in many ways. And then that in itself will transform society on many different levels. But to get there, it is true that we do need some raw materials to make that transition. And I'm sure many of you have heard about this in the news. We're going to need more minerals such as cobalt, lithium, nickel, and copper to make the technology that will transform us from a carbon-based to a clean energy society. So that is a reality, and I want to acknowledge that, and that the demand for these minerals will be increasing and is increasing. So with that in mind, I want to focus mostly on copper. And the reason for that is, first and foremost, copper is going to be indispensable for the green economy. I mean, as we speak, copper is indispensable for our daily lives. We all rely on copper. It would be incredibly difficult to go through your day without using anything that did not have copper in it. And if we want electric cars, I think it's estimated that an electric car requires 2 to 3 times the amount of copper as a car with a combustible engine. Solar panels rely on copper. Windmills use a huge amount of copper. And copper is the primary metal that would be mined from PolyMet and the Twin Metal projects. There's also nickel and traces of cobalt and platinum metal groups in these ore deposits in northeastern Minnesota. And we'll get there shortly. So the classic syllogism that we have then, all you philosophy majors out there and people who studied logic will appreciate this, that if we need copper for a green economy and that they can mine copper at the edge of the boundary waters, therefore we need the mines at the edge of the boundary waters for a green economy. And indeed, that is the argument that is often made by pro-mining groups and their allies. So the big question then is this true? This really isn't a question I think that gets asked. I think too often it's taken for granted and isn't properly interrogated. And that's kind of what I want to look at today. Are the claims that we need these mines in northeastern Minnesota in order to transition to a green economy true? We know they come with an enormous amount of risk, that copper sulfide mining has a perfect record of pollution. It is inherently polluting due to the fact that the copper is bound up in these sulfide-bearing ores. And in order to get at that copper, you need to crush up the ore, which exposes the sulfide-bearing ore to oxygen and water. And when that happens, just like iron produces rust, these sulfides produce sulfuric acid, which is chemically the same as battery acid. And this pollution does not stay put. It doesn't stay localized at the site of the mine. And in a water-rich environment like the boundary waters or northeastern Minnesota, it can be particularly dangerous because the water will spread this pollution far and wide. There's thousands of lakes, many different rivers, creeks, and this vast interconnected network of water would cause that pollution from the mine to spread through hundreds of thousands, if not millions of acres of water. So these mines are truly an existential threat to clean water and to the wilderness. But do we need these mines for the larger good? Do we need them to combat climate change? So this this has the makings of something of a Sophie's choice, right? This is kind of one of those painful decisions that that can really keep, you know, people like me and a lot of other supporters of the boundary waters and those who want a green future up at night. So let's dive into some of these questions. First of all, there's the question: do we need more copper? And currently, as it stands, the International Copper Study Group, which is an industry group composed of copper producing and consuming countries, has predicted this year that the world would have a surplus of 79,000 tons of copper, and in 2022, 109,000 tons of copper. So basically, that is, the world is producing more copper than it's consuming over the next two years. So it's not as if we're running out of copper anytime soon. And the reserves of copper, there's about 40 years of reserves of copper that we know of in the world. Now, more specifically, the United States copper consumption, this was a surprise when I found this, and this comes from the US Geological Survey, has dropped quite significantly in the last 20 years. And this is despite a steady rise in population, emergence of electronic cars, electronic everything, and other sources of green energy that use copper. Nonetheless, the United States now consumes 48% less copper than it did 20 years ago. So the copper production, or the copper consumption in the United States, is going down, and the production in the world is actually currently at a surplus. One of the big arguments we often hear is that we need to open these mines to become resource independent, and that's a reprieve of the energy independence argument that, you know, really gained strength in the 70s when OPEC had an embargo on the United States, and there's that drive to become energy independent, produce all our own oil, and now it's kind of taking a cue from that same playbook that let's produce this copper so we don't have to get copper from other countries. But the fact is, the copper that would be mined in the United States would be traded on the international market. That doesn't mean it would leave the United States, doesn't mean it would stay in the United States, but these are international foreign companies. Glencore, which owns PolyMet, is based in Switzerland. Antofagasta, that owns Twin Metals, is based in Chile. And these metals would be sold and traded on the global market. So for instance, you can look, here is a graph of US imports and exports of copper. The blue is the exports, the imports are red, this is of copper ore, and the exports far exceed the imports in this case. And the United States, as it stands, is the 5th largest producer of copper in the world. And it's also important to note that Antofagasta, the company that owns Twin Metals, recently signed a deal with China to sell more copper to China. So again, these are commodities that are sold on a global market. So if we have a lot of copper and don't have an urgent need for copper as it stands right now, what about the other metals that exist in these ore bodies? Nickel is the secondary metal that in PolyMet and Twin Metals ore deposit, and it is certainly important for the green economy, especially for batteries for electric vehicles. But according to the Nickel Institute, again, another industry group, only 5% of nickel that gets mined goes to batteries. The vast majority goes to stainless steel. So this argument that we need nickel for the green economy is, yes, it's true, but but only a small amount of that nickel would be going to those uses. It's a bit of greenwashing, if there ever was one, because it's a stronger argument to say we need to mine to electrify our fleet of vehicles rather than make new stainless steel appliances. Some of the other minerals that exist in trace amounts in these deposits are cobalt and the platinum group metals. And recently, the pro-mining allies have really tried to change the story by asserting that we need PolyMet and Twin Metals in order to produce these critical minerals. And these minerals are there, but in very small amounts. So for instance, PolyMet estimates that there's about 76 parts per billion of platinum, and that's 0.0000076%, meaning it would take over 13 million pounds of ore to process 1 pound of platinum. Another example is with cobalt and the Twin Metals deposit, which has a far higher grade of cobalt than PolyMet, and yet still contains only 110 parts per million, or 0.011% of cobalt. And you compare that to the proposed Jervois cobalt mine in Idaho, which has a grade of 0.55%, 50 times the concentration, and that really puts in scale just how little cobalt is in these deposits. So this is a way of saying that while there are some critical minerals in these ore deposits, they don't exist in a significant way that would, tip the scale on the global supply and make us move faster into the green economy. And that brings us back to copper and this issue of low grade ore. It's not just cobalt, platinum groups, or nickel that exists in scarce amounts in these ore deposits. The fact is the copper itself exists in small amounts. This is not a rich deposit of copper. We've known for over 70 years that copper exists in these deposits, but until recently, with the increase of automation, efficiency, and rise in global copper prices, it just hasn't been economically feasible to mine here. And just because it's more efficient doesn't mean it's going to be more environmentally safe or good for workers or the economy, I would add. And even according to the plans that these mines put forward, even in the best of all possible worlds, if they were operating at full capacity and producing, the maximum amount of projected copper that they hope to, they would still only contributing 0.38% of the global copper supply. And that's both Twin Metals and PolyMet combined. So that is not a significant amount. And basically the world is not standing by waiting for these two mines to go online in order to start producing the needed technology for a green economy. Now, be that though it may, I think, to play the devil's advocate, I would counter to say, yeah, but we do need mines. We do need to get those metals, and 0.38 plus 0.38 times 10 more, it starts to add up, and does eventually contribute to the 22 million tons or whatnot, which is of copper that's annually produced in the world. And to that, I would respond that there's a much cleaner, much more efficient, and much cheaper way to get these metals that is at one level easier than more that I think it's overlooked, even though we all know about it, and that is recycling. Copper is one of the most perfectly recyclable metals there is. It can be used and reused, forged, reforged over and over without losing its properties such as conductivity and so forth. So it's really a star player in the circular economy, if you will. And currently the United States gets about 30% of all its copper from recycled sources. And we can do a lot better than that. If we raised that to 50%, which is currently what the European Union is at. So that's a comparable economic structure and society. It would be like adding 5 twin metals or 10 polymets. So investing in infrastructure that makes it easier to recycle and reuse and really, ups the game on the circular economy would result in far more metals per year than digging a hole in the ground and doing traditional mining. Further, recycling requires about 85% less energy than traditional mining and is 13 times cheaper. So there's real benefits with recycling. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I saw there are a few questions out there. Just to conclude, much of the talk we hear about needing these mines in order to transition to a green economy. It's a bit of greenwashing, rhetorical sleight of hand in an effort to make them these very controversial and toxic mines look more appealing to the public. But the fact is there's better ways to get these metals, not to deny that we don't need them, but there's better ways to get them. And the deposits in northeastern Minnesota just aren't as important as many of the mining proponents make them out to be, and wouldn't tip us towards a green future. So with that, I will take some questions if there are any.
Great. So yeah, I'm seeing that we've got some questions here, and we'll just encourage folks to keep entering your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I want to start off, Pete, with one from Alan, who's asking if there is currently a surplus of copper, what is the incentive for PolyMet to open the mine in the first place?
Sure, it's a good question. So there's currently a surplus of copper, and I'm glad you brought that up, Alan, because there are longer term forecasts where it depends what you look at, but usually it's by 2030, 2040, the need will increase 30 to 40% for copper. So the copper, like the long-term trend will go up for copper. But as it stands right now, there's a surplus. So these mining companies they're in it for the long haul, basically. So they're looking at these long-term forecasts, and even if copper prices aren't quite what they need to be in order for them to turn a profit, they're waiting for that time when the market, which is very volatile, is in their favor, and then they would start producing and start selling at the desired price. And I would also add that while there is that, the forecast that it goes up, there still is about 40 years of reserves, and reserves happen to be identified deposits where they could mine, where it's feasible to mine. So Twin Metals and PolyMet are considered that. So there's plenty of reserves in the world. And this just kind of goes to the point that the notion that no one would say we're running low on copper, running out of copper, running out of possible sources of copper.
Great. And Dave just added a question here that says, building on Alan's question, are there other new copper mines coming online around the world at this point?
Yes, there are. In the United States, the majority of the mines are in the Southwest, Utah and Arizona, very different ecological zones than Northeastern Minnesota, arid versus, very water rich. And Chile is, I think produces about a third to half of all copper in the world. So there are new copper mines that come online.
Great. I'm seeing kind of a collection of questions about copper recycling. Let's see, let me just kind of sift through. Somebody is wondering, David asking, how might the pace of copper recycling be accelerated?
That's a good question, and I wish I had a better answer for that. I think it's something we at the Friends want to do more with, like having viable alternatives. And I know there's a lot more organizations like Tech Dump and other ones around the cities and in Minnesota that have ethical recycling practices, really focusing especially on like e-waste. But from a policy stance and how that could be increased, I think part of my optimism is that there's so much talk about becoming resource independence and being sure the United States can source domestically its own minerals, that will kind of force us and force lawmakers to stop just thinking about the traditional way of digging holes in the ground and building mines and saying like, oh yeah, we can get a lot more via recycling, and really putting forward the infrastructure for this circular economy.
Kind of another related question there. Somebody wondering, could recycling provide or replace jobs that are promised by mining, if you know anything about kind of the potential there?
Right, and that's that I have been meaning to research for a while, because I've been asking the same questions, that same question. What's the economic impact of recycling? And unfortunately, just to be honest, I don't have that answer. But I think, and I don't think this is just me, being biased from my own point of view, but I think you could probably get more jobs than just through mining. I mean, mining is so heavily automated now. I don't have the data in front of me, but there's data out there that shows, how many individual workers it takes to produce a pound of copper over the last 40 years. And, the production goes way up, work is going down. And a lot of the recycling work does require individual people.
Great. Yeah, that'll be something that I think we'll continue to look at how all of those things play together and see what Friends' role can be there. Stephen is wondering, are there major sources of copper recycling? Is it mostly used wiring, or are there other specific items that are routinely recycled for copper?
Yeah, I think, in our individual lives, it's mostly electronics or appliances that get recycled. And there's a number of areas in the cities and throughout Minnesota that take those, and throughout the nation that take them. Otherwise, we always hear the story of a house being built in someone's neighborhood and the wires and the piping get stripped. But I think for our day-to-day lives, it's usually those appliances and electronics that have the most potential to be recycled.
Great. And just to jump in, I'm seeing a couple kind of questions about like follow-up resources, wondering if you would be able to send out like a fact sheet or provide some of the references and sources so that people can, have their own conversations about this, and know that background for themselves.
Yeah, I will. I was planning, I was going to talk to Maya about this, but we'll send a follow-up email. There is a blog that we have up now that has links to all of that, but in the follow-up email, I'll more explicitly provide the sources, because obviously when someone who's, it's not a lie, I have a very specific stance I'm coming from, and I'm shooting out all these numbers. You want to say, well, where are those sources? Where are you getting that from? So we'll look for a follow-up email, probably early next week. We'll send one out.
Great. Yes. I also see a question from Kristen. Are decision-making officials aware of this information? I know that I've seen many of our elected officials who are kind of boundary waters and clean water supporters. I see them in the audience here, and appreciate you for being here and kind of learning about this with us. I think it, probably some of the ones that we wish were here, that we're still working to convince are not in the audience today, but we'll continue to kind of, send this information along up the chain to decision-making officials, and appreciate those of you elected officials that are joining today. People wondering kind of on a personal level, like, is there any action that individuals can take to help advance copper recycling or some of these other alternative options?
Yeah, I think, that's another somewhat of a blind spot. And obviously the easy one is, don't throw away your electronics, don't throw away random wires or random, we all have lots of plugins these days. Take them to recycling centers. And, as we're starting to develop this at the Friends, we're going to also develop more of an action plan on, what you can do for recycling, how to be involved, and how to maybe, sway policy on that.
Great. Kind of a related note, I'm seeing a comment here from Maria, who says, I'm a representative from Tech Dump, which is a really great organization that is involved in recycling. She says, e-waste is the largest growing waste stream in the world. There's definitely room to grow and jobs to be had. One way to increase copper recycling is through better and more robust original manufacturer responsibility programs. So thank you for that comment. I'm grateful that you're here with us listening.
Yeah, thank you, Maria.
Okay.
Yeah, Tech Dump's great. They're also supporter of Prove It First.
Yes, one of our organizational supporters of our Prove It First bill in the Minnesota legislature. So thank you. Sorry, give me a second. I'm just kind of sorting through some of these questions here. Aaron is asking, Aaron says, great comparison of historical copper usage and excess relative to current needs. Do we have projections on the future usage of copper based on expected solar expansion?
Yeah, and I do want to be straightforward on this, whereas we may have a surplus in these next 2 years. Pretty much every forecast is that the copper demand is going to go up, and that we're going to need more copper, which will be a combination of better recycling programs and more mines. So that's just, I mean, I'm not gonna try to hide that from anyone. Let's just acknowledge that right out. But then it does come to the question of, are we going to make, in moving towards a green economy, are we going to make the same mistakes that were made in the carbon economy, which is just, drill, mine, extract everywhere? Or are there some places, particularly areas that have high concentration of water and are particularly vulnerable to the pollution that would come from these mines, that we should not mine? And then what I'm trying to do here is to look at how much copper, how much nickel, how much metals would these mines actually produce? Would it make a dramatic impact. And from my from the research and the numbers I've done, the answer is no. That in this case, right, you can almost get into a very crude utilitarian argument that the risk just would not be worth the benefit, and that's kind of the core of the argument. It's again, it's a tough trade-off. It's a tough decision. I think a lot of environmental issues are not as easy as we'd like them to be, because we do need these resources that, pretty ugly the way they get to us. But we can make educated decisions about where not to mine.
Kind of a related point that someone brought up here in the Q&A, saying they're arguing that there is much more dirty and exploitative mining worldwide, for example, in the DRC, and it would be better regulated here in the US. And the folks would appreciate some counter arguments to make when having conversations about this. Yeah,
so this is one we hear a lot. And there's recently an article in the New Yorker, which is very hard to read, very important to read, about cobalt mining in the DRC. And the pro-copper mining allies and really make this argument a lot, that if not here, we're going to have to do, they're going to have to mine in areas that have humanitarian issues, that have no environmental safeguards, et cetera. And the response to that is that mining in Minnesota is not going to shift all the mining. We're not going to shift mining here, right? We're not going to produce so much copper, so much nickel, so much cobalt that it creates a global surplus that drives prices down, that then makes it economically unfeasible for these other mines to open. Like, that's just not going to happen. They're still going to be mining in other parts of the world. They're still going to be mining in areas that exploit human labor. Like, it's not going to solve that problem. Like, it's a major red herring right there. So no economist would ever agree that this wouldn't, what it comes down to, what I'm saying, a long way of saying it, is that mining in Minnesota is not going to put an end to that.
And I think just to follow a point Teresa mentioned in the comments here, it can happen here too. Companies that we know are acting poorly in other places are not gonna, suddenly become great, wonderful employers that, really care about their employees' health and safety when they're in Minnesota all of a sudden. Right. So I think, thanks for bringing that up, Teresa.
Yeah, thank you. Exactly.
Okay, I'm seeing, it looks like a majority of the questions that we have here have already been addressed in some way. I see Ken is asking, are there other mines that are kind of proposed or interested in mining in Minnesota, in addition to PolyMet and Twin Metals, down the pipeline in the future? Is that something that you're worried about?
Yes. So PolyMet and Twin Metals are on the Duluth complex, it's called. I think it's something like over 4,000 square miles, this rock formation right on the arrowhead. And there are multiple deposits of copper throughout there. So as we speak, I think there's something like 40 exploratory permits in the Superior National Forest. It's been a while since I've checked that, but there are multiple other companies drilling, exploring, and seeing, what's out there, where else would it be feasible to mine. So, 15 years ago when PolyMet started to come on board, even though that's not in the boundary waters, Friends of the Boundary Waters took that on because we knew that would set the precedent for future mines. And we knew that there were potential for much more than one mine. Then Twin Metals followed, and around 2013 started to come up, that started to really flare up. So there are other areas and potentially other mines that could come on board. And, we see that as a real threat. And that's why, we're hoping we've been trying to stop them before they even start. And, cross our fingers, feeling good about it, but copper's always going to be there.
And I'll use this too as an opportunity to plug our Prove It First legislation that would require anyone that wants to build a sulfide mine in Minnesota, whether it's in the boundary waters or near the boundary waters or somewhere else in the state, to have proof that it won't pollute. And so a law like this would really protect, the whole state, the whole ecosystem. And that's kind of one of the reasons that we are proposing this Prove It First law, recognizing that these future mines are, in the works, might come along, and, will be something that we also will not wanting to be having for our clean water. Okay, I see a question here, kind of more specific to Twin Metals and PolyMet. Catherine's asking, have Twin Metals or PolyMet done anything to address their environmental impact on wildlife in the ecosystem? It doesn't take a genius to hear that battery acid will be flowing through the boundary waters and beyond, and not know that fish, birds, mammals, and insects and plant life will be devastated by that. So kind of wondering what those companies have done, or if they've said anything about what they will do.
Well, I think, it's kind of two answers to that. They have the public facing PR talking points, which are, this is going to be safe mining, it's not going to cause pollution. And there's no reason to trust that. And then there's the technical aspects, which I'll, try to speak to, and try to speak to some of our concerns. And those have to do with how they'll contain the tailings and the waste that's produced, because, like I said, it's a low quality ore. So if, you're getting 0.5% of that ore body is going to be used, the rest just gets crushed up and has to be disposed of and stored someplace. So PolyMet most notoriously wants to build a upstream dam, which is a outdated, very dangerous method that has been banned in Brazil. It was responsible for a horrific collapse, dam collapse and tragedy that happened in Brazil 2 years ago. It killed about 250 people. And, Brazil has since banned that type of waste storage, as have several other countries in South America. But in Minnesota, we think it's good enough for us. So that's one of the big issues we have with PolyMet, is that their way of containing the mine waste is highly suspect and dangerous. And even if that were to work, it still would seep into the groundwater, and it always seeps into the groundwater. And again, I don't have the technical information in front of me, but PolyMet itself, they are allowed to dump, certain amount of pollution into the water each year, and they have planned for that. So this whole, like, not one drop of pollution, which Twin Metals often speaks about. It hasn't been done before. They can say it, they can have a PR campaign, they can make a nice commercial, but that's not proof. And again, this kind of goes back to our Prove It First bill, where we don't want nice words, we don't want promises, we want hard proof, like show us a mine that has not polluted. And of course they can't, so they're fighting this bill.
Kind of a follow-up to that, Ben asked, acknowledging that there will be this environmental devastation, how long might those effects last in the ecosystem?
It's in the hundreds of years, because we're talking, it's acidification of lakes, and then this acid, it leaches out heavy metals. So the metals like lead, mercury, that are in the rocks and in the ore deposit and elsewhere, then that gets into the water system. And you don't have to go far to see the effects of sulfide mining. I think it's 50 million gallons of contaminated wastewater is dumped from abandoned mines throughout the western United States each day. There's a big legacy of pollution from mines throughout the United States. But yeah, it would be hundreds of years that it lasts.
I'm seeing some questions kind of about the status of different things that we are working on. Some folks wondering about the updates on the Prove It First bill, and then if there are any updates on some of the lawsuits that we're working on around sulfide mining. And I know that that's kind of a whole separate discussion, but maybe if you could give just a short overview of where some of those things stand.
Sure. So Prove It First bill did not get passed. We introduced it into the state legislature in January, but I think we made we laid some really significant groundwork. It has the most support of any major environmental bill since the Clean Water Amendment was passed over a decade ago. We had, I think it was 67 supporters in the Senate and the House. We maxed out on I'm gonna get the word wrong. I'm gonna get the word wrong, but the help me out here, Maya. It's not co-sponsors. We maxed out on co-sponsors in the bill. So there was a lot of support that was really important in this first year. And legislation like this doesn't just happen. You don't just introduce it one year and then it passes. I mean, sometimes, but it's going to take, I think, hopefully a couple more years. We're aiming 2023. That's our goal for passing it. The more people learn about it, the more they like it, because it's very common sense. Basically, it's telling these companies to put their money where their mouth is, and that Minnesota's not going to be the guinea pig for this for this make-believe clean mining you're talking about. So that's where we're at. The legislature's out of session, so we're gearing up with grassroots support for the next legislative session with Prove It First. So you'll be seeing a lot more of that, more in the fall as we gear up for next January.
And just to add to that, sorry. I'm just going to mention that I'm putting a link here in the chat for anyone that's interested in joining our Citizen Action Network. That's kind of a group of our supporters who are working on this issue, whether that's writing letters to the editor or contacting legislators. So I'll put a link to join that in the chat in a second here. And that's a great way to stay up to date on kind of, how we're working on this fight for Prove It First over the coming months.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Maya. And then as far as lawsuits are concerned, we just had a big victory in the Minnesota Supreme Court with PolyMet, and the Minnesota Supreme Court has sent the permit to mine to a contested case hearing, which will decide on the matter of the bentonite seal, which is part of the waste containment system that PolyMet and DNR have been avoiding for a long time. It's basically just a clay layer that supposedly is going to contain the pollution that's produced by the mine waste. So PolyMet does not have a permit to mine, which is a huge victory. About 2 or 3 years ago, I think a lot of people had this dark, resigned feeling that it's going to happen. We had a good fight for 12 years. But it's thanks to a lot of hard work. Kudos to all of our supporters who hung in there. PolyMet doesn't have a permit now. They also have to put a specific date for closure and reclamation on the mine, which is a big deal, because before that, PolyMet wanted to just they had a forever permit, which means they would never have to close the mine, that it could always be, quote unquote, operating. And that leads to these kind of environmental disasters of abandoned mine sites. And they see it as huge burden, you know, to do what needs to be done if in case they open. So that the wind's really on our sail there. For Twin Metals, we have, hopefully none of our lawyers are listening because I'm going to get the courts all wrong, but we are still challenging the mineral renewal and the renewal of Twin Metals mineral leases, and that's in federal court, and I believe it will go into the federal appeals court next. I think that's where it's at. I'm not sure exactly where it is. We're also, you know, we're also hopeful with the new administration that they will review the events that led up to the renewal of these mineral leases. Just for background, they were not renewed. They had expired. Twin Metals had no legal means to mine. This is back in 2016. Then Trump was elected, had a very industry-friendly Department of the Interior, and through some real legal contortions, basically said, oh no, Twin Metals, they get automatic renewal. We're going to renew their leases. We're going to basically roll out the red carpet for them to proceed down on the way towards mining at the edge of the boundary waters. So we challenged that in court. And we're still in the federal court on that issue. New administration, Deb Haaland, who is at the head of who heads the Department of the Interior now. She knows about the boundary waters issues and is an advocate for us. So hopefully there can be some movement there, as well as this truncated study on the effects of copper sulfide mining in the Superior National Forest. That was a study that was commissioned again in 2016 with 4 months left. The Department of Agriculture put an end to it. They redacted every single page and then released it. So you can find the document online, and it is literally 62 black pages. So clearly there's something there that the mining companies don't want, because their allies are all up in arms like, we don't need a study. What would a study do? What would science tell us? But hopefully that will be renewed as well. And we can complete that study, which has the potential of leading towards a 20-year moratorium on, I think, 234,000 acres in the Superior National Forest. So there's movement on the federal level there. We have multiple lawsuits against Twin Metals in federal court. On a state level, we are definitely beating back PolyMet. And then again, on the state legislative level, Prove It First, I think, continues to gain momentum, continues to gain steam. So I think we have a lot of options to protect this national treasure that we have.
Great. Well, I think that overview kind of might be a good place to end it. I think for me, it really highlights that this really is a long haul fight. So we're grateful to all of you for being supporters of the cause and of the boundary waters and of the work that Friends is doing. And I'm glad that you all were able to join us this afternoon for a great presentation. Thank you, Pete. This was super informative. And I know that a lot of folks got a lot of great takeaways from this. We will be sending out a follow-up email either later this week or else early next week. And we can include some of the stats that Pete mentioned, as well as a recording of this if you want to, learn more or see it again. I'd encourage anyone that has follow-up questions. I know we didn't get to all of them, but if you have more questions, please feel free to reach out to me by email. You should have my email from your confirmation from the Zoom, and would just encourage you to stay involved, keep in contact with the Friends, and thank you so much for joining this afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.